When Putin invaded Ukraine in 2022, he could not have expected that he would still be at war 2.5 years later. The initial special military operation failed horribly. Ukraine has mounted an unexpectedly strong defense, and now Russia is being forced back. The assistance from Western allies has been overwhelming, and Ukraine has used the weapons provided to deliver more decisive blows against Moscow. According to reports from May of 2024, Ukraine has managed to reclaim 54% of its territory that Russia had initially captured. In addition to this, the casualties from the Russian side have only continued to increase, and reports show that Russia is losing 1,000 soldiers per day on average. Putin is losing soldiers at such a fast rate that he is now tricking teenagers from other countries into fighting on the front line. In an interview with The Times, a 19-year-old Cuban boy claimed that he accepted an offer posted on WhatsApp to make money doing quote-unquote construction work, and found himself at a military base instead. He claims that he and his friend were given weapons and sent against their will to the front lines. So, in this video, we'll be looking at Russia's death toll, the reasons behind such mass casualties, the damage to Russia's arsenal, and a comparison with Ukrainian losses. The actual figure of Russia's losses are so staggering that Russian state media has been working overtime to try and discredit the estimates of the numbers of casualties. So, if you can help us get this video to a wider audience who has been fooled by Russian media by just giving this video a like and sharing it with your friends and family, that would be greatly appreciated. Thanks so much. The most recent report on Russian casualties was made by the UK Ministry of Defence and Defence Intelligence on September 7th of 2024. This report has estimated that Russia has suffered over 610,000 casualties since its invasion of Ukraine in 2022. According to US officials, in August of 2024, Ukraine and Russia's total deaths and injuries has neared 500,000. The Business Insider also reported that as of May 2024, Russia was losing 1,000 soldiers a day in the war. The UK's contribution of estimates was a little higher, placing the losses at a total of 1,200 soldiers per day. Downing Street also estimated that Russia has lost 500,000 soldiers to death or injury since the beginning of the war. It has also been noted that there is a large focus on recruiting ethnic minorities for the front line, especially because of the value of their lives in Putin's eyes. Analysts have referred to this approach as a meat grinder approach, where the loss of dozens of soldiers to take the life of one Ukrainian appears to be reasonable. Putin's strategy has been to send out soldiers in waves to drain Ukraine's ammunition. In this new strategy, the first wave will include poorly trained soldiers as decoys. The second wave will contain veterans and much more experienced soldiers who will then catch the Ukrainian army by surprise. On the other hand, America has placed the total losses at 350,000. In May and June of 2024, the Russian army recorded its highest rate of losses so far, with over 70,000 soldiers killed or wounded. The increase in casualties was connected to an increase in pressure in the Kharkiv region. Reports from the region by Ukraine show that between May 10th and September 21st, Russia lost more than 16,000 troops. The report also shows that 5,426 of these people died, while 10,958 of them were wounded. At the end of mid-June, it was reported that between 462,000 and 728,000 Russian soldiers were out of action. As we trace the numbers back into 2023, we see that Russia has been fighting a losing war even before Ukraine's victories in 2024. At the beginning of 2024, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces published totals of Russian losses, claiming that they had recorded 379,610. In another report made by Joris van Bladen, a senior associate fellow at the Egmont Institute in Brussels, there have been approximately 320,000 casualties on the Russian side. A quarter of these were killed in action, and the remaining 3/4 were wounded. Then, at the end of 2022, a declassified US intelligence report recorded that the Ukraine war had cost Russia over 315,000 dead and injured troops, and nearly 90% of the personnel it had when the conflict began were gone. The report also stated that Moscow's losses in soldiers have set back Russia's military modernization by 18 years. The Battle of Bakhmut, which was fought in 2023, should be highlighted here as well, because it took a large number of Russian soldiers. The Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, downplayed the number and tried to claim that there were only 11,000 casualties in the battle, but Western officials confirmed that the number was closer to 30,000. These astonishing numbers do not include the Wagner mercenaries, who lost a third of their soldiers in the battle. At this stage, we also need to discuss Russian civilian casualties as well, to see how the death toll has progressed throughout the war. On the 30th of June, 2023, reports stated that there were 287 civilian casualties, with 58 killed and 229 injured. In Crimea, reports stated that 6 Russian citizens were killed and 16 were injured. Later on in August, as the war heated up in Belgorod, 79 more Russian civilians were killed. However, these figures must be taken with a pinch of salt, because it's difficult to estimate recent civilian casualties. The Kremlin has been tight-lipped on the matter, and has not allowed data to be gathered by independent organizations to provide objective statistics. Looking at all these casualty reports, although there are many discrepancies in the different figures from different countries, the bigger picture is that the number of losses is alarming. As Ukraine receives more assistance and launches more counteroffensives, Russia could be in trouble. Due to these reports and evidence that has flooded social media, Russian state media has been working overtime to try and discredit the estimates of the number of casualties. In one of his daily press briefings, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that the White House numbers were being plucked from the sky and were not reliable. He also squashed the reports, saying that Washington does not have data to be able to make such estimates. Outside of comments like these, the Kremlin has maintained a policy of silence and not provided much comment on their death toll. Although Russia has decided to pretend that it is not putting its soldiers through a meat grinder, Putin has still milked the opportunity to stand with the wounded soldiers. Videos have been taken of him visiting hospitals and having state media take pictures of him handing out medals to wounded soldiers who he calls heroes. This has been in a bid to portray himself as a caring leader who is concerned about the welfare of his soldiers. The scale of these losses has forced Putin into a corner, and he has to take extraordinary measures to try to sustain his army. In response to mass casualties, the standards for conscription have been relaxed, and policy now allows for the recruitment of convicts and older civilians. Russia can deny the numbers all they want, but what further confirms the high number of casualties is the race for mobilization by Putin. As early as September of 2022, Moscow was already calling 300,000 reservists to supplement the losses on the front line. To date, this reserve force is almost depleted. The mobilization campaign was suspended in November of 2022, but Russia has been recruiting outsiders to fight in the war too. Russia has reportedly recruited about 15,000 Nepalese to the front line, but an unknown number are currently missing or possibly dead. A Nepali soldier commented on the dire situation, stating, "I didn't join the Russian military for pleasure. I didn't have any job opportunities in Nepal. But in hindsight, it wasn't the right decision. We didn't realize we would be sent off to the front lines that quickly, and how horrible the situation would be." Russia has also recruited a large number of its illegal immigrants into the war. One of these recruits told the BBC that a lot of Uzbeks, Tajiks, and Kyrgyz that were in prison were being sent out to fight in the war. It was initially voluntary, but according to Faruk, an Uzbek immigrant, the conditions have changed. In the beginning, I also considered going because everyone thought that Russia was more powerful, that Russia would win, maybe in 1 month, 3 months, or 1 year. But now we see how many people are dying there, and if they're short of soldiers, it's not good. If they tell me to go and I refuse, then they can declare that I am against Russia. More reports of other foreign nationals being forced to fight have come in. In an interview with The Times, a 19-year-old Cuban boy claimed that he accepted an offer posted on WhatsApp to make money doing construction work, and found himself at a military base instead. He claims that he and his friend were given weapons and sent against their will to the front lines. The first call for 300,000 reservists had a negative impact, with many protests and men fleeing the country to escape being forced into the war. The levels of desperation have only increased from then on, and even ex-convicts are part of the people who have been called to the front lines. An NPR report from 2022 claims that there was video evidence from September of 2022 showing Yevgeny Prigozhin, the former head of the Wagner mercenary group, making the rounds at prisons, offering convicts freedom if they could survive 6 months on the front line. These convict army units are known as Storm Z, which is related to the Russian word for inmate, Zek. These units are afterthoughts and are considered to be sacrificial lambs. One regular soldier commented on their fate, saying, "Storm fighters? They're just meat." Another soldier who fought along the Storm Z troops said, "This means they're running out of people, and our commanders plug these holes by sending people to Storm Z. We think this is unlawful and illegitimate. This has to stop." Putin is losing this senseless war, and he's losing fast. But you might not have seen that in news, because a lot of traditional news organizations are not good at properly covering important geopolitical news. And that's why we've launched Global Recaps, a geopolitical newsletter that covers important geopolitical news in a simplified manner. Every evening, we send out an email directly to your inbox covering important stories that you can read in just a few minutes. Best of all, this is completely free, and you can sign up right now by clicking on the link in the description or by scanning the QR code. Sign up now and become more knowledgeable about the world you live in. One member of Storm Z, who's interviewed by the US-funded website Severreali, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, said the Defense Ministry promised inmates a salary of about $1,700 a month, $31,000 per injury, and $52,000 paid to their relatives if they die. This move calls into question Russia's ethics. Many of these convicts were serving time for serious crimes like war crimes, rape, and murder. Putin has defended his actions, stating that everyone makes mistakes, and these convicts have redeemed themselves because they chose to fight for the motherland. Many of these soldiers have told horrifying tales of being killed like mosquitoes and fearing being captured by Ukrainian forces. The Russian Defense Ministry has also stepped in to try and get numbers by launching advertising campaigns to encourage real men, quote-unquote, to leave their peacetime jobs and to go to the front lines. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin introduced a one-time signing bonus offering $22,000 for residents who join the military. These recruits are also offered $59,600 after their first year of service. On top of that, they will receive a one-time cash payment of about $5,690 for injuries. Russian lawmakers have also passed legislation that allows for conscription to be done online, making it difficult for conscripts to avoid the inevitable. In the past, Russian men had to be served with paper conscription notices, delivered in person at a registered address or place of work, and this could take time. This allowed them to disappear or to avoid the authorities for as long as they could. Reports show that pensioners have made up a large portion of volunteer numbers, and reports show that most of them has signed up for the financial reward attached to the war. The Russian regional government of Tatarstan have also started offering finder's fees to residents who convince their friends and family to go and fight on the front lines. The region is targeting ethnic minorities and offering them over $1,000 to bear the brunt of Russia's war in Ukraine. The Kremlin has been trying to keep the death toll under wraps, but moves like this show Russian citizens that the losses have been fatal. Michael Horowitz, an Israel-based analyst and the head of intelligence at Lebec Risk Management Consultancy, stated, "The Russian population has been looking for a space to ignore the war, and these measures mean that the space is shrinking fast." This September, Putin ordered the military to increase troop numbers by 170,000, which would bump up the Russian military personnel to more than 2.2 million. As the army expands, we are guaranteed that the death toll will rise as well. Now, we need to discuss why Russia has been experiencing so many losses in the war. Casualties are a natural consequence of conflict, but these numbers raise alarm bells about other underlying issues. The first reason we will discuss is the poor preparation for the Ukrainian war. Russia's assumption was that it would be a landslide victory, which meant that it did not have to do enough preparation for any resistance from Ukraine. The initial invasion was poorly planned because Russia was attempting a fast-paced assault and thought it would be able to make it to Kyiv in no time. According to Henrik Paulsen, a professor at the Department of War Studies at the Swedish Defense University, Russia believed that it was going to capture Kyiv in 48 hours, so its strategy was not designed for a lengthened attack. Because of this, they packed light, which meant that they were unable to support themselves as the conflict dragged on. Jeffrey Edmonds, who served as the director for Russia on the National Security Council in the Obama administration, stated that he believed that the failure should be pinned on leadership. The Russian leadership actually believed the things they said about the Ukrainians, and they didn't think they would put up a resistance. This poor planning meant that the initial wave of soldiers was sacrificed, which placed pressure on the reserves. At this stage in the war, veterans were dying off. and Russia's elite brigades had been slaughtered during the early stages. Now, with the war effort dragging on, Russia has been forced to send in the B team. This has only made the situation worse, because these ill-equipped men have not been able to mount a strong defense. With the war moving at such a fast pace, there was not enough time to train new conscripts, so most of them joined the front line poorly trained. A large portion of Russia's foot soldiers are the 300,000 mobilized reservists who've been thrown in at the last minute. These soldiers have also been given outdated equipment, which has only worsened the situation. Most of them ended up wounded and killed on the front lines. An investigation into the deaths of Russian soldiers showed that about 250 of them were over the age of 60. A fifth of Russian casualties were volunteers, while former prisoners accounted for 19% of confirmed deaths. Many also believe that the funds for the war were mismanaged by top defense personnel, and this has trickled down to the experience of the soldiers. Another widely shared opinion is that Putin does not care about his people, and thus the alarming mass casualties are not an issue for him. This can be seen by how comfortable he is sending ill-equipped ex-convicts to the front line. Many of the people who mobilized in 2022 were pressured into signing contracts to stay with the army, and there was no vetting to ensure that any of them were qualified to go to the front line. Putin's focus is not on who goes, but rather that his war machine is constantly stocked. Those who choose to desert are also heavily punished, and Putin has enforced a 10-year sentence for deserters. It has also been noted that there is a large focus on recruiting ethnic minorities for the front line, especially because of the value of their lives in Putin's eyes, i.e. none. Analysts have referred to this approach as a meat grinder approach, where the loss of dozens of soldiers to take the life of one Ukrainian appears to be reasonable. Putin's strategy has been to send out soldiers in waves to drain Ukrainian ammunition. In this strategy, the first wave will include poorly trained soldiers as decoys. The second wave will contain veterans and much more experienced soldiers who will then catch the Ukrainian army by surprise. With such a strategy in plan, it's no surprise that Russian soldiers are dropping like flies. All of these problems have affected the morale of the soldiers, which has also contributed to the large number of casualties. Low morale affects the performance of the troops and leads to failed operations. Reports by Ukrainian military intelligence in April of 2024 claimed that over 18,000 Russian soldiers in the southern military district had deserted their posts, and 10,000 of these were mobilized conscripts who did not want to be there. In order to get away from it all, some of the soldiers resorted to destroying their weapons and surrendering. The conditions have forced many Russian soldiers to turn to theft and robbery to survive. There have been reports of Russian troops looting shops and stealing fuel from Ukrainians for their military vehicles. In a short recording, a Russian soldier named Oleg Vlasin said, "We are fleeing. I don't know where. We no longer have the strength. We've been here for 3 days without food, water, or support. Everyone is mutilated. I don't know what to do next. I can't move my legs, and I want to live." In another heartfelt video, Russian soldiers from the 26th Armored Regiment of the 47th Division sent a cry for help. Most of them have been forced to return to the front line despite being injured. Many move with crutches, yet their command sends them directly to the front line straight after they come out of the hospital. While one veteran was sent straight from the hospital to the front line, other soldiers also pointed out that once they were discharged from the hospital, they received documents mandating them to return to the front line.
Мы военнослужащие 1009-го полка. Я Валетов Евгений. Это мой брат Валетов Игорь. Вчера выходили на штурм Волчанска. Из штурма у нас ничего не получилось. Все получили ранения, кто-то убежал. Дальнейшую судьбу их я не знаю. Возможно, раненые, возможно, убитые.
26-го танкового полка 47-й дивизии. Находимся в зоне СВО. В ЛНР прибыли из госпиталей более 50 человек. Это остатки из 3 рот. Наше командование вывезло нас в расположение и группами.
Russia's treatment of its recruits is widely documented, and it's clear that there is no value placed on their lives. Sending already wounded soldiers back to the battlefield is just as good as killing them. And it's no surprise then why the casualty numbers are so high. Ukrainian media has commented on the situation for Russian soldiers and called them cannon fodder. What is worsening the situation for Russia is that these demoralized soldiers, without a desire to fight, are fighting against Ukrainian soldiers who are fighting tooth and nail for their country's sovereignty. This makes the playing field uneven and contributes to the rising death toll, as Ukraine has been putting up a good defense. Before we discuss the loss in Ukrainian casualties, let's take a look at some of the losses that have hit Russia's arsenal. At the beginning of the war, Russia had 3,100 tanks, but they lost about 2,200 of them. This has led them to use T-62 tanks that were used in the 1970s to supplement the losses. What has contributed to the mass losses is the fact that Ukraine has been very intentional about attacking Russian artillery deposits and ammunition to dwindle their supply. In a recent September attack, the General Staff of Ukraine forces reported that Ukrainian soldiers damaged 2 tanks, 6 armored vehicles, 1 RSZV, 66 operational tactical level BPLA, 27 cars, and a unit of special equipment of their occupiers. Reports by both US and Ukrainian officials to CNN stated that Russia's artillery fire is down by an alarming 75%. According to US officials, the rate for rounds has dropped from 20,000 rounds per day to around 5,000 per day. What is even worse is that the troops had to resort to 40-year-old artillery shells as their supply of new ammunition has dwindled. But before we close off, let's quickly highlight Ukraine's losses and casualties in comparison to Russia's. According to President Zelensky, as of February of 2024, the death toll for the war was at 31,000. He refused to comment on the number of injured soldiers, claiming that Russia could use that information in strategy. Independent reports stated that Ukraine has suffered around 17,200 fatalities and about 33,000 injuries. Zelensky gave his figure in response to some data that had been released by Russia, stating 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died in this war. Not 300,000 or 150,000 or whatever Putin and his lying circle are saying, but each of these losses is a great loss for us. Despite reporting these low figures, US officials reported last year that 70,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died and 120,000 were injured. According to Russia, Ukrainian casualties have exceeded 215,000 people. While both sides seem to be unclear about their numbers, it is no secret that they are taking some major hits in this war. In relation to civilian casualties, the United Nations Human Rights Commission has been able to give a clearer number. According to their report, as of January 23rd of 2024, there have been 29,330 civilian casualties, with 10,191 killed and 19,139 injured since February 24th of 2022. A later report that was published stated that between the 1st of March and the 31st of May, at least 436 Ukrainian civilians were killed and 1,760 were injured. The Ukrainian civilian casualties have been as high because Russia ignores humanitarian law and purposefully attacks civilian centers. Russia has been known to shoot at schools and residential buildings in the Kharkiv region using cluster bombs. These bombs are deadly because they do not always detonate immediately and become landmines that sometimes explode unexpectedly. It is difficult to make an honest comparison of both sides because both countries overestimate each other's losses and undercount their own. US reports show that Ukraine has doubled Russian deaths, while Russia has quadrupled Ukraine's casualties. While the Ukrainian military's casualties have reportedly been less than Russia's, more Ukrainian civilians have died in the war. This is because of a large part of the war being fought on Ukrainian territory, and they've lost more in that area. The figures recorded by different institutions have differed, but the truth is the same. As the war rages on, Russia is losing casualties at an alarming rate. Putin's style of warfare is focused on winning, and he does not care how many people have to die to get there. Poor preparation and low morale have been the major reasons for the death toll in the last couple of months. And unless Putin implements measures to incentivize and replenish his army, the death toll will continue to rise at a disturbing speed.